morning, good evening, and good afternoon to everyone. Once again, we meet on Friday. Now it's May 1st, and we're now in the process in the world of actually beginning to open up our societies, and we all have to hope that in fact that's the right thing to do. Of course, we still have great danger from the virus, and we don't have yet any kind of treatment really for it, aside from actually hoping that it can pass and helping to people to keep breathing while they are infected. And there's still no vaccine. I think there's a lot of activity, and we all hope that this will come to a head fairly soon, I should say. It can't be very soon, and that we will actually see the end of this crisis. And what I think we all hope for is that this shows everyone in the world that we must be vigilant, that we have to support medical science, and we have to be prepared for these kinds of awful events, which in fact, in this case, people who were in the know actually knew about earlier, but yet were not able to have the political clout to impress upon governments the necessity to act quickly enough. Anyway, for all of those people who are in areas which are now opening up, please still be careful. And I'm in New York now. We are, at least for the next 2 weeks, still in our state of, as our governor mentioned, pause. And finally, I hope that everyone who's watching is actually in good health, and I hope that you can actually hear what I'm saying. So and actually can see me fairly well. So is that the case? Do we have anybody who has trouble hearing me? Okay, very good. So, what should we speak about today? We left last live stream with Carter and Brahms, and the sense, as I said, of a liberation of the appoggiatura. Now I want to go even further into what I consider are the very, very basics of musical expression and how they are related to everything else, to life itself. And especially since we are basically wind players watching this, to the breath. So first of all, I want to talk about what I call is expansion and contraction. Very early on, I mentioned about how Sviatoslav Richter mentioned how he plays with his feet this way. But what that does is give a feeling of actually extension of the body. And then as we relax pressure here, we contract. And this is essential to all life. So this is expansion this way, expansion this way, and contraction. Now, how does this relate to the appoggiatura? Well, very simply, if we go here and we do the most elementary, you see. So we had the feeling of expansion, and this is expansion, which is not simply that things get bigger. Okay, I'm bigger. No, it's like the rubber band where you expand, and that expansion creates tension, creates energy, and going back creates a resolution. So the sense of that tension of expansion to resolution is the essence of the appoggiatura, even if it's the other way around. You can have a double. That way. And somehow, I believe that this is built into our genetic makeup, that this feeling of expansion and contraction this way has great emotional significance. And this also, when we are speaking, has a sense that you want to emphasize, you go expand, and then you contract. And sometimes you want to have someone pay attention, you contract a lot like this. And then you expand, okay. So in a certain way, it's both ways. Now you're wondering, I'm sort of blabbing on about they're going this way, going that way, and they're thinking, okay, well that all makes a lot of sense, but and I can understand that from the appoggiatura, but what does that have to do with contemporary music, let's say? And in order to understand that, I think we start actually earlier. And I will go to Robert Schumann, because he has, as in so many cases, he gives us the clearest examples of what musical expression is. So, here we go. Let's come back. And I always am picking pieces which I believe everyone will know well and are sort of simple enough to make a point that's easy to follow. Okay? So, there's also, in life and in music, the sense of the circle and the spiral, you see. And this also has to do with this expansion and contraction. As we have the spiral, it goes here and there, the middle. So, let's say we take the first of the Schumann romances, and after the very beginning wonderful statement of this theme, we have this. And then even here we have this. So we have this sense of appoggiatura, this even in the accompaniment, sort of expand, contract. So not this way. And then oboe or the clarinet or the flute or the violin or whatever instrument. You could probably even have, as a vocalese, goes up the octave, then up more, then you see. So it creates this, Schumann's melody creates a spiral which goes from the octave to up and then goes back on itself. That way. You see. So the expression of this has to do with the expanding, then coming down, then going back into the middle. As we look at more modern pieces, let's say modern, that's a funny thing to say in a certain sense. Can you still hear me? I may be mumbling, I don't think. But we find this principle at work basically at all times. And that creates what I call the liberated appoggiatura, which is basically the sense of expansion, which then resolves in contraction. Here. We have that in many, basically in all music. Here, it's an expansion from this point, which goes and then back to here. So again, we have a melody, it moves through here and comes back. And of course, in tonal music, it comes back generally to our home. And I've spoken about this earlier, so I won't deal with this particularly more. Only to say that Schumann very often contradicts that. So he ends with kind of an unfinished sense. Should I? No, I think I will leave an explanation of that to perhaps another time. Now going from here, though, I can just take a brief example of Nielsen, for instance. And in Nielsen, he has, in his clarinet concerto, for instance, he has, again, this sense of this way and back. And he has the sense of that we have basic interval and the things fit inside. Or this way, and then to the middle, this way. So, even here, and then we have and that's here. Oh, and then he that way. So it expands and contracts, in this case, to A minor. He doesn't stay there very long, but repeats though this. So back F major, but then B again to the same thing. Here. Okay. So now we move, although Nielsen, of course, wrote his concerto after Berg wrote his 4 pieces, but we move to the 4 pieces of Berg, it's Opus 5, because he actually uses this principle of expansion and contraction, which I mentioned briefly last time, really as the generating principle of this piece. And we have that even here in the very beginning as we start. So that goes from here, and ends up sort of in the middle of that, and then he expands. And as I mentioned in the first piece, basically he starts with that in the big middle part, and then he keeps moving down to, and moves down, and then from here he moves up, and then he moves up to here, and then moves up to here, down to here, to the D, and then up to here finally, to here. And with that, rather than keeping the contraction, he just stays because he has expanded to the ultimate this way. So in a certain sense, we can say there's no way back. Then the second piece, of course, has the opposite. As he goes from here, and then he moves away all the way up to here, and then he comes right back. And in between this, in this piece, again we have this expansion coming from here. And in the clarinet part, again expanding this way. Then he expands more, and up to here. And then he starts to contract everything again. That way, boy, this is finally, then finally. That way, contract. So this piece, in fact, is like one big inhalation and exhalation. To that point. Let's go to the third one. And here again, we start with this. And then, again, he expands. And then the clarinet going up. And here, with the expansion, he also has a contraction of time. So he starts this way. So in other words, these values get smaller, smaller, smaller until they coincide this way. So as things go this way, in a certain way, we can say that time speeds up. Go here. Okay. If any of you are not following me particularly, and I can imagine that, sometimes I don't even follow myself, please feel free to ask any kind of question you like. This way. So, and then we once again go from here, he expands again. And in the clarinet part, we have, once again, our spiral. And then from there, he starts to unravel the spiral this way. So again, this has this expansion and contraction and expansion happening again. The next part too is quite fascinating because then we have this one, and then we sort of staying input. And then he goes down in the piano. At the same time, and then he doesn't even wait for this contract, but he goes right to the middle immediately. So it's like, and then boom, contracts this way. And along with this is he does this to time. Here before, remember, he contracted time. Now here, and then he goes. And then he switches. So time, as here he's expanding, he expands, slows time down. And then, of course, cancels this. The last movement, of course, I already mentioned a bit about how he does contract and expand here, and I'll just say again in the middle section now. That he contracts, and then he starts to expand time. And then once again, he starts to expand again. This is a very violent kind of expansion. And then we just have an echo in the middle. And things disappear. Remarkable work. And I point out in this kind of detail, of course we can look at it in much greater detail, but not, I think, in this sort of venue. But what we see here are elements which have generalized musical expression. Or I should say, not have generalized, but have gone to the very basics of musical expression. And what that has done, or that did at that time, was allow people the freedom to come out of, maybe we call it tonal constraints or whatever, to find expression in a certain way, we can say, without the limitation of conventional melody. So, this sense of going this way and that way is what liberated our sense of what music can be, I think. Okay, what shall I do now? Since I promised Carter, I will actually look at Carter in quite great detail. But first, perhaps, I will go to a work of Milton Babbitt. This is his quite remarkable work for solo clarinet and bass clarinet, called My Ends Are My Beginnings. Of course, that comes from a Machot, but that's not so important. What is important is what Babbitt is actually doing in this piece. And the piece is made up very much of palindromes, so it goes forwards and it goes backwards this way. But along with that, it again has this kind of expansion and contraction. It's a 12-tone piece, but I'm not going to bother with that part of it. Instead, what I'm going to do first of all is to kind of show you what he is doing in terms of building the sense of expansion and then his sense of resolution without actually referring to any kind of what we could call tonal centers. Or, perhaps more interestingly, and this is for you, all of you, if you take a look at the music, you can find much more generalized tonal center to this. Okay, I just throw this out. Okay, so how do I do this first? This is, I'm going to play just the opening phrase, and then I will speak about it, sort of, and then play a bit again. Okay, so once I needed my clarinet always. I'm never quite prepared. So I think I use this. Ooh, no way. So cork grease is very important. This on. I think I should use this mouthpiece, but also I need this. Okay, bear with me, bear with me. That's right. Okay. So here is the beginning of my ends or my beginnings. Oh, I should put this way maybe a little bit. Yeah, like this. Then I put this back. Like, boom. Okay, this is the first phrase. Is it coming through okay? Yeah? All right. So that's it. I'll play one more time. Now, the first thing is I try to show you. Let's see if we have this. Can you still hear me? Okay, great. So I point out certain things, and hopefully you can see them. So this is, by the way, our most fancy chopstick. I thought it's appropriate for one of Milton's pieces. So here we go. So we start here, and he has multiple connections here, which move up and down, basically stepwise. So we have the A flat going, then he repeats A flat, A natural, B flat. I speak in clarinet pitch just because it's easier to see everything. Okay. So then with that, then we have the G here. And then that G goes to the A in that bite, this way. And then he has another, the E to the E flat here. And then with the D to the D flat, that way. And the B, which I didn't do, it's too complicated, to the C here. You see, so this creates kind of a mosaic with things going both up and down this way. And the next thing, just to take a look at, you see how he goes from here up to the B flat, down to the D, D flat, then the C, and ends in the middle with the E flat here. Oh, I'm there. It's like, what happened to this chopstick? Yes. Okay, here. Okay, so now maybe could we hold it there? I'm so sorry.
I'm shaking my
I know.
hand.
I know. This way. I put my reed on not quite correctly, but that's all right. Okay. So, and so you can see basically what he is doing. Okay. So, okay, we can get rid of that. So even in this very complex music, which has all sorts of different dynamics, and I'll explain more about them in a second. He still has this sense of motion this way, and then anyway resolution. Without. And let's say I go on. He went from E flat to D. Oh. And then goes from what was C before down to B flat. Right? Which although is not exactly the same, is somehow related to the opening this way. So in this very complicated piece, we see a few things here. We see this expansion and contraction. We see how things move basically up and down in a certain sense by half steps. As we're going up this way. And I think what we can say when we look at this and we see this motion of half step, that at least in music which has 12 tones, the half step is somehow primal. And that is the, I would say, the engine which actually creates this expansion and contraction. And that also leads us to the sense of the basic appoggiatura, which is this expansion and then the opposite happening. Okay, and along with that, even in a piece like this, let's say, we have motives. And if our minds are clear enough, we hear them very clearly. So we have first, and then we have, as I mentioned, and then we have here, and they're, of course, not identical, but the gestures recall one another like that. So if we open our ears, we can hear this kind of thing actually rather clearly. Of course, the problem with pieces like this is most of the time you hear them only once. And this is an aside, but the problem we have with music is that a lot of the music we listen to, that we've heard many times. So we already know what's happening basically, and we can appreciate in such a greater and greater degree because we have been experiencing this music. Now, if we go back in time, of course, let's say around 1790, Mozart was in Vienna, and at that time, his very good friend Ditters von Dittersdorf mentioned that it's something to the effect. Of course, I don't recall the exact quotation. That we all know that Mozart is the greatest composer, but his music has become so complicated that we cannot follow it from beginning to end. Then, of course, later on, Schumann said Mozart is all a matter of, beauty and grace, because, of course, by that time already, the music of Mozart was, well, not only understood, but was very familiar. It would be nice if a piece like this, Milton's piece, could be sort of played once a week for a while. Now, I've played a few times for you now, and maybe you get a better sense of what's happening. And then the wall that is sort of guarding you against this kind of newness. For instance, I'm sure I'm not speaking for many of you, but I just speak in general. It sort of breaks apart little by little through familiarity. And before I go on, though, I speak of the dynamics a little, because that has a lot to do with, in fact, very much to do with his complex polyphony, which happens, even though we have here only one voice. I get my chopstick again. Okay, and let's take a look once again. So here we go. Up there, you see, we're going to the G here, and this gives you a basic motif or something with this kind of falling with the dynamic to the mezzo forte. Then what he gets from the piano, he reinforces. So he goes up to mezzo forte, and then forte, and then fortissimo. Here. So he reinforces this line here, and from here, he goes here, he goes back, and then he starts with piano and goes the opposite way. Piano, pianissimo, that way. You see. Okay. And then he emphasizes the D new note here, and then comes away from it to his sense of resolution, going to D flat and then the E flat from there. So this is a sort of very sort of sketchy sort of sense of how he is working with his polyphony. Yeah. But let's me play and see now if you can kind of follow it. So you see, then we go on. Okay. So I think with that you begin to get an understanding of this piece. I'm not going to play the whole thing by any means because it's good 16 minutes long. It's a little wonderful, and I have to get my bass clarinet out also. So it's in 3 movements. The first clarinet, second bass clarinet, and third back to clarinet. Really fascinatingly wonderful work. I give you just 2 more details. Remember, my ends are my beginnings. So, of course, and then, so the end, which is the G, becomes the beginning of the next. The next, the C becomes the beginning. That way. And things become more complex, but we see how it works in the sense of a kind of very, I would say, high-tech Hocket. This is so okay. Then actually one other thing, which is kind of cute. So we have here in Berg this beginning here. Now, if we put that down a step, that way, so we here we take, for instance, the D flat for later on, etc., put it here, we end up actually with a kind of paraphrase of the beginning of Berg. Oh. What had... I'm sorry, something happened.
Technical problem.
Technical problem. Uh-oh.
I think, excuse me, I pressed something totally wrong. Well, I don't know how to fix this. I'm so sorry. You just continue, maybe
this way?
Yeah, it's this opposite.
Oh, maybe the camera this way. You see?
Yeah.
Let's see.
Oh.
Okay.
Excuse me, everybody. I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay. I think these are kind of nice little incidents.
Sorry.
It's just shows that we are actually doing this quite live, sort of impromptu. So I think that I will move from Babbitt now. To Carter's Gras. And here, once again, I go first to the piano, because the way he constructs this, I mentioned before how he has his all trichord hexachord that he builds the piece out of, and that's all very good, well and good, I should say. But what is more important is how he actually does this, and how he uses it to create unity, but also, and more importantly, to create drama and expression. Okay, so maybe I do this on with the clarinet, makes sense, and I don't need to go back to the piano right now. So we start here. So, the first part fits inside the second part. This way. You see, and this becomes his first, I would say, example of the contrast. So I go back here anyway, I think. You can do anything you want with that, but you start to and then the larger interval creates more tension. And then he plays around with that, of course. So it still goes down, but then and with that keeps it very small. And their interesting thing is that you have the half step, which is kind of and then the whole step, which feels more comfortable in a certain sense, because before that was the half step. Then he keeps moving, just sort of, that's what we're doing. Then he expanded more. And then we go to that very significant note, this B concert A, which completes the 6 notes of the opening of the first all trichord hexachord. And the question that always I ask, this is I would say, the sign of a great composer, right, is how the Carter chose to do this, actually, and to end with that B. And that B is not simply there because maybe it connects to another hexachord, because that could, there are, you know, within 12 tones you have many different possibilities for that. But so why the B? Why is that significant? Okay. Because it's right in the middle. You see, as we're going up and down here, all of a sudden that B he has that right in the middle, and that within his scheme of things is his only possibility of doing that. So that gives a sense of all of a sudden, as he moves to right, and then there in the middle. So again, we have this expansion, but a kind of contraction which does something else. Okay. Then I will also speak about dynamics more, because when we're dealing with music which is not tonal or does not have what I would say would be clear kind of historical familiarity, dynamics become very, very important. That's so because they shape the structure which actually creates the emotion. So it's possible to misinterpret what could be the structure if we do not have the dynamics. So, for instance, if we didn't have any dynamics here, and when we wonder, oh God, how do I play that? I don't know. What does that mean? But because of the dynamics, and also I should say that we need knowledge. We need a little bit of knowledge about the composer, in this case Elliott Carter, and in this way his mindset. So his mindset always has to do with creating characters. So we can see here with the dynamic, there are two characters. So then, that way. And I should mention that this was back in 1993 when he had just finished writing the piece, and he had sent me several copies of it at different stages of compositional completion. I went to his home to play it for him, and I started off playing. I said, no. He says, the first ends mezzo forte, and then forte subito. I went, okay. No. Still, it's mezzo forte, then forte subito. I went, I try again. No. Still not quite right. That's right. Okay. Then. Yes! That's what it is, you see. So, we know that that his sense of dynamic was very, very precise, because it delineated the change of character. Then the next one, then I could go on to the next measure, actually, and things became a little easier. You know, that this is it was probably a good 15 minutes that I played that first measure for him. You see, so that we what does this have to do with rhythm also? And if we're playing, for instance, normal music, that's a funny word for me to say, but let's say Brahms, if I play this way, it's like, okay, it's all right, but what is that? And we have this. Coming from the opening, which then he ends up stopping and then doing again. That way. And then we have this in the beginning. And if we just play in tempo, it's sort of like what's kind of stirring soup. I think people are doing that a lot nowadays. But in any case, what we need to do is to make these different. So how do you do that? That way, we take a little time and change the shape of it, which then makes these two parts, which have the same outlying motion, let's say, we give them meaning. Okay, so here too, even though Carter, his rhythm is very precise, etc., I put a little comma. You see, that way. And we can do that throughout the piece, of course. But then there are spots where, in fact, maybe you shouldn't do that. So, for instance, later on, is that way. And we need a little bit of knowledge again about Carter, and he is not alone in this, because what we find in the 20th century is that composers began writing melodies which had more breaks. So they're not simply not like that, which is continuous in the melody. And between phrases, perhaps you have breaks, but they will have breaks inside. So it'll be like, perhaps something like that. So here, Carter writes actually a two-bar phrase which is connected, but yet disconnected at the same time. But we see in his dynamic writing, and again, this is why dynamics are really of paramount importance, that gives the sense of the shape. So, and then mezzo piano, and then again mezzo piano going to mezzo forte, and then back. See? So he has this sense of arch going this way. And since I'm dealing with this expansion and contraction, we find that here we are in the middle, and we go to the end. So he expands that, and then from that he expands more. There. He expands more. And then goes on. So in other words, again we have this expansion, then going back to the A, and then again he expands and contracts this way. So in a way we can hear this whole piece as going this and back, this and back. So within these two characters, we also have this feeling of breathing back and forth. Okay. I will promise I will play this, but I thought maybe now it's good to move to what was perhaps my second topic, which is breath support. And you wonder, I've been speaking about basically the philosophy of music. It's what is the essence of expression, and now we go to breath support. This is and I do this partly because I've got received several queries about this, and of course the basic audience are wind players, I imagine, and even if you're not, probably the idea of what to do with the air is rather important to all of us. Now, the question is, what is breath support exactly? And for a long time, I actually decided not to speak about breath support, but to speak about breath flow, just breath there. And the reason for that is that I saw many people who would do something like this. They say, well, I need breath support. So they go, and so in other words, like, oh, somehow the sound doesn't go out. I don't know why, but I'm supporting. And I'm thinking, oh gosh, yeah, maybe there isn't such a thing as breath support. There's just breath constriction, we could say. But then I came to think that no, in fact, breath support is a valid principle. Okay, now, in order to explain, we need our imagination, because I don't have enough props, I think, to really. So, we inhale, and we fill our lungs from basically going down, around and up. We're full. And then, if we hold the air inside, there are basically only 3 points where we can hold that air. If we don't hold it all, the air collapses, our lungs collapse, we end up exhaling. We can hold it with the vocal cords, so those are the cords that we have. And they hold it, so there. Or we can hold it with the back of the tongue. Or we can hold it with the lips. Like that. And we can feel in a certain way what is breath support if we actually take a big breath and then try to hold it, and at the same time try to exhale. So in other words, you probably can't see, but what I'm doing is I'm holding this close so that the air doesn't go out, but yet I'm trying to contract the lungs to push the air out. Then as soon as I open my mouth, I lose the sense of support or strength that comes around here. So what breath support does, it controls how the air is exhale, how you blow the air through the instrument that way, so that it doesn't all come out at once or come out too little or something like that. So breath support is actually created by the lungs, the muscles around here, muscles which control the diaphragm, the pectoral muscles, etc., up here, trying to push air out while we create resistance against that. And that can be a little bit like you take a straw hose, let's say, with water. The hose and the water is coming out, blah, 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 and then you pinch it a bit, and then the strength of the stream is, of course, greater. And you pinch it more until finally you pinch too much, and nothing. It ends completely. So, a lot of breath support basically comes from the constriction, the creation of resistance, which we have in our 3 points, which are the vocal cords, back of the tongue, and the lips. Yeah. Now, the vocal cords are basically, in when we're playing, at least in Western music, there are cultures which actually use the vocal cords to create pressure and constriction. That's which can be quite forceful. But for us, I think, basically, if we do that, we get a kind of feeling that everything is here and we're a little bit constricted. Oh no! Okay, so we try to keep the vocal cords, when we are playing wind instruments, from closing when we don't want them to close. So that the air can actually go through fairly freely through the mouth and then into the instrument. So that leaves 2 points: the pressure here in the lips and the teeth, and the back of the tongue. So it's that relationship which creates the resistance for breath support. Yeah. And as I mentioned in the very first one about using the back of the tongue and stretching the mouth, if we focus more the back of the tongue, then we can fine-tune things more with the front of the mouth, this way, to create a lot of different, I would say, degrees of perhaps breath support. That way. Now, what I've come to understand is that this does not actually negate the function of these muscles that are here, and that these are really, anyway, critical, and the strength that's around here has to be maintained. So when people have talked earlier about breath support and became yes, breath support, that way, they're not really wrong about that. It's just what we need is a combination of the feeling of this pushing against the resistance. And that creates breath support. Now, of course, it's much easier to show this than it is to actually speak. So I hope that people kind of understand what I'm getting at. Now, what does this have to do with what I was talking about before, this expansion and contraction? I think this is essential, in fact. And now I come to the point that we are, I'm sure that most of the people who are watching are performers. And so we have to transmit the emotion, transmit the characters to the audience, so that they the people who are listening to us can actually have imagination. And for that, we need this kind of strength, you see. So if I play like this, just the opening, but I have no breath support. And there's no sense of this moving, this creating the tension of the minor third. And then I stop this way. And then another character. I go back. Breath. It's very strong. Pushing. Then back and forth. I'm not going to go back and forth like this. That's kind of silly, but anyway, it does serve a point. So I think this is essentially what I think about breath support. And why did I earlier decide to speak about breath flow? And I still think that this is critical to understand, because I saw so many people who, when they would say breath support, they would just hold the breath like this, that way, so there would be no breath, no flow of air. So we have to channel the air forward this way, so there is air flow. And to do this, also, it's nice to visualize. So the great thing about string players, for instance, is that the bow is something that we can see. And string players are always speaking about bow distribution. Only because you can't just play like that, blah, 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 blah. So sometimes the bow is slower, and then for certain notes it's faster, and then how do you negotiate the fact that you have just a particular length, and then you have to, in a way, start over, going up, whatever. You can't keep going in a circle like this. So some people would love to have circular bows that way. With wind players, we have, in a certain way, the disadvantage, if you're not, unless you're a harmonica player, of course, or there probably are other instruments where you can do this, but you can't inhale. So we have, if we say down bows, we have what I call down blows, this way. But we don't have up blows there. But we can simulate that, of course, in various ways. But we should anyway, with this, we have air, feel that, in fact, we have what I call blow distribution. So we can feel that if this is the air, let's say I go like this. So I have this much. This is my virtual bow, in a way. So you can be even. You can do it faster. Which perhaps creates more intensity. You can start this way. You can go. This. So we can feel, for instance, as if we're playing like a. And have the imagination that the air is something physical that we can see, in a way, and we can control because we see it. So, back to Carter. If I'm playing, it's a, and then stopped. And then the next one, yata. So it's a lot more, bigger stroke, even though the notes are smaller. Same thing next. Dom, boom. It's a kind of different kind of air stroke that we have. This way. Okay, any questions about anything? No? Wow. Okay, perhaps no one's actually watching. But perhaps you watch later. That's okay. So, I will take this and I don't want to. Now, maybe I actually play for you. Okay? So here we are. This is Carter's Gra. think with that, we stop for today. Thank you very much for bearing with me. Please be well. We will continue these, and I hope that the world will be able to open up again in a safe way. Okay. Take care.